This is Model Steam Engines Top Tip Time, Part 14. It's a very good series to watch if you wish to gain some knowledge, because it's full of really useful top tips. Some obvious, some less obvious, and these extracts are from a series called A Stuart Models Beam Engine Rebuild. And even after being well into the build, time-wise, there are still some problems. Some of the fits between parts on this engine are not brilliant. I machined the crank web, so I know that the fit between the crank pin and the crank web is going to be okay. I didn't make the crank pin, and this has a spacer washer, which is quite a good idea, to centralise the big end. The crank pin is held to the crank web just by this nut. It took me quite a long time to get this nut to engage with the thread on the crank pin, and finally it did, so now I can tighten it up with a spanner. And again, I'm using an ordinary spanner, not my Barco spanner, because it's not in a good place for a Barco. There isn't much clearance for the jaws of the spanner around where the nut lives. And now for the very first time, live as you see it on the camera, I'm attempting to turn over the engine manually, but there's a problem. As I rotate the flywheel and the beam lifts, the piston hits the top cylinder cover on the inside. Also, if you look carefully, the Watt's parallel motion is a little bit on the tight side. The entablature is moving at both sides as I move the piston up and down. I will have to rectify this, but not just yet. I'm concentrating on the position of the piston in the cylinder. On the end of the piston rod is a fitting that connects to the Watt's parallel motion, and I'm able to screw the piston rod in and out of this fitting until I get it in the right position so the engine goes all the way over. The problem is I'm not very happy with the amount of the piston rod that's coming out of the fitting. The end of the piston rod is threaded 2BA. This screws into the fitting, and to be perfectly honest, I think it's just about to unscrew from the fitting. Anyway, I'll tighten the nut and see whether I can get it to work. Yes, and now the piston goes up and down, but there's far too much of the piston rod sticking out of the top fitting. The end of the piston rod is reduced to fit into a small hole in the piston, and only the end of the reduced part of the rod is threaded to take this lock nut. I'm going to dismantle it so you can see how it's put together. To do this, I'm clamping the rod in a tailstock chuck. Then I can use my trusty Barco spanner to remove the lock nut, and here's the piston sat on the bench. When I make a new piston and rod assembly for the engine, I'm not going to make it this way at all. In this clip, I'm measuring the length for the piston rod. Using my small bandsaw, I'm cutting it to size. I'm cutting the length of the piston rod purposely too long. There'll be more about that in the next episode. But for now, I'm going to concentrate on making the piston blank. I found a suitable piece of brass. Here it has been fitted into my new 3-jaw chuck. I found this piece of brass in my scrap box, and it's a bit of a funny shape. It's tapered at the end, but that's not a problem. Starting the work, and the first part of the job is to face the end. To be honest though, I don't really need to face the end of this piece of brass because I will be turning it round in the chuck, but it just bothers me that it has a depression where it's been drilled in the past. Whenever I put a piece of bar into the chuck, I always feel obliged to face the end. It's an old habit, and old habits die hard. Time now for the longitudinal cut. The speed of this clip is 400% above the normal speed. And in no time at all, thanks to the magic of video, I have a fully machined piece of brass bar. In the real world, it's never a good idea in the home workshop to machine brass too fast, because all the chips fly off in all directions. It's better to use a slower spindle speed and take a deeper cut. The parting off process I'm showing at normal speed, and as you can see, the chippings are flying everywhere. And almost magically and painfully, most of these chippings are flying onto my hand, which is being used to wind the handle which makes the parting tool move. Because on this old Boxford lathe, the only automatic traverse that I have is longitudinal. I'm still having trouble with the lathe speed. It's slowing up. It needs a new drive belt or two. For the moment though, I'm using this stuff. This is called belt slip, also often referred to as belt dressing. You spray it onto the V-belts and it leaves a sticky deposit. It's a bit messy and I try not to use it, but at least now the tool is cutting properly because the speed of the lathe is constant. You will notice that I turned the piece of brass bar around in the chuck. It's held by the machine part. The end of the brass bar fell into the chip tray before the cutting tool had got all the way through, and here, before I face the front properly, I'm removing the small part that sticks out in the middle. The position of the lathe tool in the holder is vital. This particular cutting tool is not locked to centre height, because there was a time when I used this cutting tool in both my Boxford lathe and the Smart & Brown lathe, so I had to adjust the centre height for each of the machines. And in this clip I'm making an adjustment to the centre height. It was a little bit too high. If the centre height is too low, that's no good, because it will leave a piece of metal sticking out of the centre of the work. And if the tool is above centre height, it will not cut the metal very well, and when you get to the centre, the tool will be pushed away from the work and leave a raised part in the centre. That's it for the facing. Now the outside diameter turning. It is most important, in fact vital, not to turn the piston to the finished diameter at this stage. The final machining of the piston will take place once it's on the piston rod. And that's why I've split this section about making the piston. This one's only about making the piston blank. I've left the piston blank slightly oversized, and now it's time to centre drill the middle bit, followed by using a twist drill that is 5/32 of an inch in diameter, because this is tapping size for 2BA. It's a good idea to memorise the more frequent tapping sizes that you require, but failing that you can type tapping size for 2BA into Google. Now it's time to thread this hole in the piston blank 2BA. I'm using this 2BA spiral tap. I don't know where it came from, I think it just came in a box of bits. I don't like the squeaking noise that the brass is making, maybe the tap's a bit on the blunt side, so I'm going to use some tapping compound to stop this. I'm tapping this hole by hand power, as you can see, and suddenly it's taking far less effort to rotate the chuck once the tapping compound does its stuff. This tapping compound is an extreme pressure lubricant. It works very well under extreme pressure. In a similar way, I suppose, to the gear oil that you put in differentials on cars. That's normally called EP90, and the EP stands for extreme pressure. Or at least that's what I think the EP stands for. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but I'm sure some smart viewer will let me know if I am wrong. I can't help wondering what this stuff would be like for lubricating bearings, but I don't think I want to risk any bearings at the moment. Now the tap's at the bottom of the hole, it's time to withdraw it, and I did that under power. And now I have a nice clean thread in the centre of the brass bar. And to complete the piston blank, all I need to do is part it off from the main piece of brass. Using my micrometer, I measured the thickness of the original piston, and I've made this one a little bit thicker because there's still some more machining to do at it once it's mounted onto the piston rod. The piston blank has fallen into the chip tray, so I'll look for that later. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website. Click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you will find it very easy to find other videos that you may like to watch.